there's some kind of, hey y'all. So thank you all for being here this afternoon. It's lovely to see you all and kind of have this privilege, share this privilege with you of welcoming to the stage two of our speakers, as well as the two editors of the collection Queer and Femme Gazes in AfroAsian American Visual Culture here today. My name is Wendy M. Thompson. I'm an associate professor of African American Studies here at San José State University. I'm also a poet, and I am Oakland native, and I'm really excited to be engaging this work and be in conversation with both of you. I guess we can go ahead and start with the bios, and I'm gonna read the bios off the slides because there's a lot to remember. Okay. In the meantime, I'm going to go ahead and extend a gracious thank you to the Artistic Excellence in Programming grant for the funds that were provided in order to support this project. So the Blasian Bay Archive and Mapping Project is the brainchild of April Burney et al. And the goal of this project is to build on the alternative visual archive championed by Rebecca and Seulghee in their book, Queer and Femme Gazes in Afro-Asian American Visual Culture. All right, thank you for this. So our first guest and speaker who I want to introduce is Rebecca Kumar. Oh, hold on. Dr. Kumar is an assistant professor of literature, media, and writing at Spelman College. Yes. She specializes in cinema and visual culture with an emphasis on global queer and feminist film. She also has scholarly interests in comparative ethnic studies, particularly Afro-Asian relations and the emerging field of Brown studies. Dr. Kumar's published work appears in 30 Years After, New Essays on Vietnam War Literature, Film, and Art, Early Modern... we have to hold it still. Thank you. The Early Modern Black Diaspora Studies, the Scholar and Feminist Online, Liquid Blackness, Refractory, a Journal of Entertainment Media, and the Oxford Handbook on Shakespeare and Race. She is co-editor of Queer and Femme, of the book we're going to be talking about today, and is currently working on a series of essays on constructions of brownness since 9/11. Our next speaker, and we, okay, yes, let us clap for Dr. Kumar. And our next speaker and guest here on stage is Dr. Seulghee Lee. He's an associate professor of African American Studies and English. In 2025, Dr. Lee became the first faculty member tenured by the Department of African American Studies at the University of South Carolina. So that deserves its own clap. Hello. Yes. He is currently a McCausland Faculty Fellow and a Pierce Faculty Fellow. Dr. Lee is the author of Other Lovings, an Afro-Asian American Theory of Life, published by Ohio State University Press, 2025, and he's the co-editor of, again, this book with Dr. Kumar that we're going to be talking and hearing from today. In addition to his graduate and undergraduate mentoring, he teaches for Trio Upward Bound. As a community engaged scholar, Dr. Lee serves as vice chair of the board of directors of the South Carolina Coalition Against Domestic Violence and Sexual Assault, as well as on the steering committee of the Columbia, South Carolina branch of the NAACP. And from 2021 to 25, the AAPI Advisory Committee of the South Carolina Commission for Minority Affairs. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Lee to the stage as well. All right. So what we're going to go ahead and start with is just, we're gonna have a reading from your book, Queer and Femme Gazes in Afro-Asian American Visual Culture. Both of you have passages that you're going to go ahead and share. We're going to ask you all in the audience to kind of, listen to both of our speakers as they read specific passages, but also kind of pay close attention to certain parts that might resonate with you that you would like to talk about or form a question around for our Q&A afterwards. Okay? All right, so did you want to go ahead and start?
We can have that first slide from Striking Vipers. Thanks. I want to thank Dr. Burney for organizing this. Without her, this wouldn't happen. I want to thank Jocelyn for organizing our travel plans, so she's here. Dia, Katrina, and of course, Wendy. This is such an exciting event, and thanks to all of you for coming. We're going to read a little from the introduction here, okay? Striking Vipers, an episode from the sci-fi dystopic British anthology series Black Mirror, follows two old friends, both black men, Danny and Carl, who can reconnect over an Asian virtual reality fighting game that they used to play in its side-scrolling version when they were roommates and bachelors. Yet, to their mutual surprise, they are not interested in fighting when they play the game in its virtual incarnation. Rather, they find the game kindles an erotic charge between them, and they begin having virtual sex while embodied as their Asian avatars. Danny as a male martial artist, Lance, and Carl as a female martial artist, Roxette. Their virtual affair leads the men to question their sexualities, and for Carl, even his gender assignment. In one scene, Danny and Carl kiss each other on a rainy night in real life to see if there are fireworks between them, but they realize that they are only aroused when they are in the world of the game, having sex as their Asian avatars. Next slide, please. Well, next one, actually. That's them kissing in the rain. And you can go back to the next one, okay. So compelling is their virtual sex life that in a refreshing reversal of the sacrificial femme trope, Danny establishes an arrangement with his wife Theo so that he and Lance can have sex with Danny's Roxette monthly. During that time, Theo can remove her wedding ring, pretend that she's single, and go on dates with other men in the non-gaming world. Early in the episode, Danny and Theo pretend that they don't know each other while at a bar. Theo admits that their little act turns her on, and Danny remarks, "Oh, my baby's into role play." The episode thus suggests that it's through role play, virtual or otherwise, that both Danny and Theo are able to have fulfilling erotic lives. Popular commentary on Striking Vipers has rested largely on whether the men ought to be read as queer or not. Some critics have meditated on Carl's potentially transgender desires. Little, however, has been made of the transracial elements, specifically the Afro-Asian comparative frame. Indeed, the show has even been described as having an all-black cast, completely disregarding Lynn and Clemtioff, who are the actor and actresses that play the Asian avatars, as integral to the episode, rendering them merely ornamental at best, or altogether erased at worst, despite their being essential to the plotline. Carl even confesses to Danny that nothing matches having sex with Roxette as Lance, and Carl says that he tried replacing it with computer-controlled characters, other players, and even Tundra, the polar bear character, but nothing else is as sexually satisfying. Lance and Roxette are clearly irreplaceable in the world of the story. Nevertheless, they are still forgotten by critics. Yet whether or not it is readily legible, Striking Vipers is indicative of a recent trend spanning the past 5 to 10 years. U.S. visual culture has embraced an especially queer and femme Afro-Asian aesthetic with crucial implications for a radical intersectional politic that has yet to be excavated or outlined at length. In fact, beyond the Asian gaming avatars, the episode is replete with Afro-Asian references that are essential to its queer plotline. If you go back to the first Striking Vipers slide. Yeah, that one, great. Danny is introduced clad in a bomber jacket embroidered with Japanese tiger iconography on the front and the print Tokyo alongside images of bonsais on the back. Afro-Asian cultural possibility saturates the contemporary visual field in ways both glaring and subtle, and its femme and queer alignments potentially challenge the heterosexism and male chauvinism that have politically dampened and diminished preceding Afro-Asian representations. Queer and Femme Gazes in Afro-Asian American culture is a scholarly collection that takes televisual artifacts like striking vipers as a point of departure from such prior worlds of comparative representations anchored by cisgender heterosexual masculinist gazes. We reorient them toward a visual archive of Afro-Asian representation. From war films to martial arts cinema to hip-hop music videos, Afro-Asian representation on screen has long emphasized cross-racial masculinities at the expense of queer and/or femme visions. The prevalence of these previous televisual artifacts and the way they have been watched has contributed directly to what Reddy and Seulghee, which we'll talk about in just a second, to an epistemological blind spot, not only within film and visual studies, but also in the field of Afro-Asian studies more generally. The essays in this collection, however, offer alternative ways of looking, both excavating and highlighting analytics of Afro-Asian intimacy based on femme, queer, and/or transgender living. They attend to developments in Afro-Asian visual culture by looking at music videos, video games, genre serials, and independent and short films. These texts are concerned not only with racial representations, but also with how constructions of gender and sexuality inform, mediate, and overlap with cross-racial encounters between Blacks and Asians. Though Asian popular culture like K-pop and anime has long been mainstream, it's only recently that the visuality of these Asian cultural artifacts have intersected with Blackness's resistance to sexual and gendered coherence. The chapters herein collectively suggest that these queer and femme developments in Afro-Asian visual culture are doing more than scholarship in the field of Afro-Asian cultural studies has yet seen. In fact, the abundance of both text and critical responses contained in this collection conveys the general sense that Afro-Asian study has much left to do with regard to both examining popular media and assessing feminist and queer intervention. In their path-breaking special issue of The Scholar and Feminist Online, Feminist and Queer Afro-Asian Formations, Vinita Reddy and Ananta Seulghee highlight that scholarship on Black-Asian relations has an almost exclusive focus on men as political and historical actors in the construction of cross-racial solidarities. Examining more than a dozen Afro-Asian anthologies and monographs currently in print, Reddy and Seulghee conclude that the solidarities studied in and countenanced by Afro-Asian scholarship are overwhelmingly among male intellectuals, activists, and artists who benefited from the freedom of international mobility and whose ideas and actions have been esteemed as historically relevant. They recognize that many of these books and articles attend to gender in some way, either by acknowledging singular examples of women in Afro-Asian history or by critiquing the masculinism of US imperialism and capitalism, yet they argue that the effective rhetoric that comprises the manifesto poetics of Afro-Asian studies nevertheless privileges militant, heteromasculine, revolutionary language and representational forms. This scholarship, as Reddy and Seulghee point out, tends to rely heavily on history as a disciplinary framework. Even with aesthetics, specifically the visual culture or sonic rhetoric of popular forms is broached, the tendency is primarily to emphasize historical record and material action, thereby leaving Afro-Asian critical discourse uninterrupted by idioms of femme affect, atmosphere, desire, joy, ecstasy, performance, and pleasure. Such emphases are shot through this collection with special attention to countering the dominant conception of Blackness and Asianness as diametrically opposed in the racial sexual imaginary. Indeed, one effective premise of this collection is the collective desire to speak back against the common sense tendency to think Asian Americans and African Americans as related primarily by structural antagonism and irresolvable conflict.
Thank you so much. Thank you for being here. Thank you to Dia and Jocelyn, for folks behind the scenes, and to Dr. April Burney. It's amazing to meet you in person, finally. And this is how amazing Dr. Burney is. She filed her dissertation while she was planning this event over the summer. So congratulations to Dr. Burney.
Woo!
And then Dr. Thompson, always so great to see you. And congratulations on the publication of your amazing collection this year.
Thank you so much.
And then my dear friend, co-editor, Dr. Kumar. I hope we get into this in a second. This is only our second time meeting in person. So this collection is very much a product of the pandemic. But now, I can't think without her. And it's so great to share the stage with you and to continue on this collaboration. It's really exciting not just to get to celebrate our text, which we haven't had ample opportunity to do yet since its publication in December 2024, but also to be at the launch of this interactive maps project and to contribute to that in any way we can. So it's really great to be here at the Inaugural, and again, thank you for being here. We should also make note of Professor Seulghee, who was a giant in our field and who passed away right as we were starting this project in 2021. And she was a longtime professor at San José State, so her memory and her presence is very much germane to our discussion here regarding Blasian presence and Afro-Asian connections in the Bay Area specifically, and then also her spirit and her intellect just kind of casts a lot of light on what we were trying to do in this collection. I'm going to read a short excerpt from the theoretical portion of our introduction, and this kind of picks up where Reb left off. Now more than ever, it seems clear that Afro-Asian connection is, in fact, not only a field of study, but an aesthetic genre of its own. It is also clear in this era that this genre has departed from the markedly masculinist forms of the 20th century. The current wave, in contrast, is saturated with Afro-Asian queerness and feminist. Most of the chapters in this collection theorize how recent queer and femme gazes make historical legitimacies and political coalitions between blacks and Asians legible. Other chapters highlight the tenderness, intimacies, and sexual pleasures between black and Asian men. Moreover, the collection takes seriously Axel Carrera's suggestion that a quote-unquote, quote, hyperbolized, naturalized relationality in the field of televisual representation tends to conceal anti-black oppression. The Afro-Asian aesthetics excavated here, quote, adventure into the most familiar everyday visuality, mass media images, to highlight how queer and femme Afro-Asian worldviews are both more ubiquitous than often perceived and do not necessarily obfuscate the specificities of anti-black violence. On the contrary, these examinations highlight the capaciousness of that violence. Yet unlike Frank Wooderson's argument that these visual representations only serve human, non-black coherence, thus exclusively propagating anti-black terror, these chapters uncover how Asians are in fact implicated in, yet vulnerable to, the racist harm of an anti-black world, offering insights regarding modes of cross-racial relational care pioneered by black and Asian feminisms. This project began in an era in which the common sense notion of black and Asian antagonism has propagated intensively as ever. Visual culture, of course, plays a primary role in the delivery of this administered sense of intrinsic antagonism, as the endlessly circulated images of Tou Thao's complicity in the lynching of George Floyd in May 2020 and Antoine Watson's killing of Yichha Ratanaphakde in January 2021 in San Francisco saturated the visual fields of pandemic-era US culture. Yet this anti/anti aesthetic of lethal racist violence gave rise to banners of resistance through the eruptive energies of Black Lives Matter and Stop Asian Hate. Whether these energies constituted actual social movements remains a matter of debate, yet their substantive force in the lives of everyday people has been notable, especially against the larger backdrop of a truly reactionary era of racial politics. In other words, the rise in both Asian and Black televisual cultures has coincided with a rise in spectacles of horror concomitantly affecting both populations. Yet the resistant energies of counter-discourses were felt on the ground and, as our text demonstrates, in the world of representations as well. Thus, the overflow of Afro-Asian representations imagined in this volume comprises one mode of cultural political imagination, offering the plausibility of a collective remaking of our racial imaginary toward intimacy, affiliation, solidarity, and shared consciousness between people of color in general and Blacks and Asians in particular. Moreover, this counter-propagandistic discourse of such imaginings has filled in for the relative lack of ethical clarity and political action provided by the cultural and political elites of both groups, limiting the truly lamentable historical fact that our popular cultures might have more to say in the names of George Floyd and Yichha Ratanaphakde than most of our cultural, political, and academic leadership. This tethering to the bleak conditions of our Afro-Asian political present is a definitive feature of not only this aesthetic genre itself, but our critical discourse around it. Afro-Asian comparison must, we contend, be rooted in the possibility of speaking back effectively and urgently to the propagandistic claims of status quo notions of Afro-Asian non-relationality. If short of being true social movements, might Black Lives Matter and Stop Asian Hate be considered glimmers of insurgency, fomenting more intimacy, affiliation, solidarity, and consciousness? If not true Afro-Asian political solidarity, might this era of popular culture overflow, perhaps especially those mediated by queer and femme gazes, be considered a new phase in the history of Afro-Asian social insurgency in the visual field and the cultural political imagination. The chapters in this collection share an affective premise of Afro-Asian optimism and the affirmative answers to these queries. While bringing thorough critical analysis to the cultural artifacts examined, our authors generally exhibit a genuine embrace of and enthusiasm in this era of representational insurgency, suggesting a counter-discourse of counter-visions bound by optimism in and as Afro-Asian critical discourse as well. Such loving work can be said to be inseparable from the heuristics of Afro-Asian studies, appropriating the notions of, quote, a kind of metacritical optimism associated with Fred Moten's notions of Black optimism and Black studies, whose, quote, aleatory goal is our historicity, animating the reality of escape in and the possibility of escape from a world bent on denying such Afro-Asian possibility. The conflation of these layered insurgencies in representations, in political relationality, and in critical heuristics yields an emphatic counter-discourse of Afro-Asian resistance that passes on inspired traditions of Afro-Asian consciousness handed down from figures such as W.E.B. Du Bois and Grace Lee Boggs. Further still, this historical moment expounds upon the present possibilities of such Afro-Asian optimism beyond the cultural sphere and into the transformation of our lived experiences anchored in mutual care and collaboration.
Thank you. Thank you. All right, thank you both for sharing those excerpts from your book. I had some questions that I wanted to kind of ask to kind of shape some of the dialogue and kind of get to the root of kind of what led to this collection coming together. And I wanted to note that for both of you, Rebecca and Seulghee, with both of your backgrounds in English, American Lit, and currently teaching in Black spaces, right? So at a HBCU, and then also thinking about South Carolina, right? Like geographically, politically, culturally, Atlanta too. Right. How do you both similarly and differently conceive of the Afro-Asian? And what led you to explore this historically rich but often overlooked field, an area of critique and study? No. At the same time.
To me, it's really important to highlight that there has never been an idyllic or truly fulfilled notion of Afro-Asian relationality or solidarity even, that it's always been a speculative and somewhat I don't know, like deeply wished for form of aesthetic expression. On the other hand, since we're in the Bay Area, it's always important to ground that critique and that starting point with the notion that what it means to know ourselves and to maybe even love ourselves as Asian Americans comes from the notion of such solidarity. And thus, we always start from 1968 and the Asian American Political Alliance and the idea of the Third World Liberation Front and the notion of enacting people of color consciousness and solidarity. And Afro-Asian is just one vector of that, but it's the one that, again, as you said, my kind of social situatedness, but also my academic training brings into view.
My training was actually not in Asian studies or Black studies at all. I was a Shakespearean, and I got hired at Morehouse College my last semester that I was finishing my dissertation. And I was, like a lot of adjuncts, told to teach comp classes, and then I got bumped to a senior seminar in writing. And my chair at the time was like, you should do something really different for this writing class. And I was like, what are you talking about? And she's like, I hear you having these one-off conversations about Black Asian stuff or brown Asian stuff. She's like, could you come up with a whole syllabus? And I was like, okay, here we go. And it ended up being so wonderful to find in particular literary and filmic touch points of Black Asian relationality. And the students were really interested in the kind of debates and themes that could come out of the fact that this is not a perfect alliance, right? And it's a tense alliance, and it allows for like a lot of historical contextualization. So we talked about the Vietnam War being one of the first integrated wars. We talked about the LA riots. We watched Mississippi Masala. We had conversations about appropriation versus appreciation, and the kind of differing power dynamics of that. And that's when I really made a switch in my career to studying this full time. And my students at both Spelman and Morehouse have been so open-minded and enthusiastic about these conversations. So it really has come from the place. And I remember when I first got to Morehouse, we get these faculty tours, and there's a Martin Luther King Center. And as soon as there's a big statue of Martin Luther King in front of this chapel, and then when you walk in, the next bust that you see is Gandhi's. And I was just so struck by the juxtaposition of Gandhi and MLK, and we all know that MLK admired Gandhi a lot, and we also know that Gandhi was really anti-Black. So it was a really interesting already, the debate was happening kind of all over campus already, and I think that kind of extends to the 3 campuses of the Atlanta University Centers. So I really wouldn't be here without my students and my co-faculty encouraging me to pursue this.
Thank you both for that. And just to kind of add to that, for myself, so I'm literally the embodiment, or one example of the embodiment of what we're talking about. So as a person who identifies as both Black American and Asian American, Chinese American to be specific, and who also was a scholar, there were ways that taking the courses separately, right? So taking Asian American studies courses, taking Black studies courses, provided different lenses, but that overlap, that crossover, just wasn't there. And so, it led to, me producing questions that, I would have to kind of do the footwork to try to find. But in terms of this book and kind of forwarding the field and even thinking about Afro-Asian, the gaze, using that as an analytic to kind of see our society, see our relationships, to see ourselves, see our world differently, the possibilities of, rather than to kind of look directly at all of the contention, right? There's a lot of that, the competition it's just such a radical and beautiful thing for me, right? As a scholar and as a Black Asian person to kind of encounter. So I really appreciate both of you for forwarding this work, for doing this work. My second question looks at representations a bit, but also as someone who kind of thinks in terms of history and timelines, probably to a fault. I wanted to ask you both if there is a way to map out a timeline of Afro-Asian American visual culture. Are there eras? Are there phases? Kind of in thinking about, popular culture, visual culture. Can you name major tropes or stereotypes, figures or artists, film depictions or relationships, as well as cultural shifts that gave way, or that have given way to the cultural wave of what we have now?
We had a really fun conversation about this question before, but the first chapter in the book is by our colleague Sylvia Chung, and it's on Charlie Chan and Stepin Fetchit, which were, they were 2 minstrel actors that made their way, from the silent era kind of into talkies. And she marks their collaboration in a film called Charlie Chan Goes to Egypt around 1912 or 1913. So already at this point in time, we have some representations by a very white gaze, right, of what the kind of particular masculine and racialized dynamic are happening between Blacks and Asians, and how that is kind of defined in opposition to whiteness, right? So that's already happening. And then I recently taught Metropolis in my cinema literacies class, and there's a moment in that film where there's like a Madonna whore dynamic between one of the characters, and she's called Bad Maria, and she dances at this nightclub, and it's this Orientalist landscape with no Asians there, but it has like a kind of Japanese Orientalist sounding name, and the only black characters that we get are background actors that are dancing with her. And already there, it's this kind of exoticized, eroticized space, even in the German imaginary in 1927, as we're anticipating World War II. So it's kind of both been there domestically, like if we think about the Charlie Chan films and the Step and Fetch It films, and it's also been global as early as cinema itself. And then you want to talk about martial arts films? We were talking about like Kung Fu, blaxploitation,
yes.
Which comes out of Vietnam War too. So Enter the Dragon and Jim Kelly's kind of collaboration with Bruce Lee. And then what was the movie with Kareem Abdul-Jabbar? Do we remember?
Oh gosh.
No, I don't remember.
There's a 25-year gap between the Bruce Lee film with Kareem Abdul-Jabbar and Rush Hour. And so one way to trace the kind of masculinist expressions of the Afro-Asian juxtaposition is that by the time the 90s roll around, the idea of Asian American and African American intimacy and solidarity has become a joke.
Yeah.
Whereas Bruce Lee in his lifetime, and then especially in that scene when Kareem plays the final boss of that film, you see this kind of lionized, albeit masculinist and albeit about a kind of performative embodied masculinity, you see a very serious take on the plausibility of Afro-Asian connection, right? It's totally different from what you get with Chris Tucker and Jackie Chan. And then Reb has a whole thing about how Jackie Chan's own version of racialized masculinity is the diametric opposite of what Bruce Lee offered 2 decades prior. And so that's one way to kind of trace what happens in the story that we're telling. Also, within our text, Professor Chang's piece about Step and Fetch It and Charlie Chan is our lead chapter. And then our final section, we end with Saweetie and Doja Cat and Beyonce. And so we have a televisual narrative that we're telling about not only how these juxtapositions become anti-stereotype and become possibilities for further kind of Asian and Black authored solidarities, which is important, but also how they become femme and queer in the gazes that are mobilized. I also want to say that in the portion of the introduction between the excerpts that we read, we have an argument for the idea of Afro-Asian cultural representational insurgency happening amidst and embedded within this larger Asian American Renaissance of the last 10 years. And I think that we can kind of call an end to that because of the conditions of 2025. But if you think about all of the major televisual texts, Crazy Rich Asians, Everything Everywhere All at Once, Minari, and Shang-Chi and the Legend of the Ten Rings, and so on, there's been an argument that I've been mounting about the relative autonomy of Asian American cultural politics really for the first time, at least in my memory and in my historical consciousness. And because I'm trained in Black studies, my instinct has always been how to anchor that within an Afro-Asian comparison. And it doesn't quite make sense to say that it's congruent to or comparable to, let's say, the Black arts movement, because it's the Asian American Renaissance of the past 10 years has been relatively absent of the kind of forthrightly radical political expressions associated with folks like Amiri Baraka. So to me, my argument, and I'm teaching a course on this right now called Asian Renaissance and Harlem Renaissance, is that the Asian American Renaissance actually has a historical antecedent in the New Negro Renaissance of the 1920s, right? Both Renaissances begin and are anchored around the violence of the pandemic, but also just periods of racist violence like Red Summer in 1919, but also the Tulsa Massacre of 1921, and then Stop Asian Hate and the portion that I read regarding the deaths of Iker Tanapakti, and then also the 6 Asian American women in Atlanta in March 2021. And then both Renaissances also are informed by quickly shifting demographic population booms, right? So the Great Migration that informs what Elaine Locke and James Weldon Johnson have to say in Locke's collection in 1925, and then the idea that Asian Americans have reached a certain kind of formation and legibility as a body politic where we can actually swing elections now. And so this idea of an Asian American Renaissance that is adjacent to or maybe overlaps with what we're calling this boom in Afro-Asian representation also is its own form of Afro-Asian juxtaposition.
Okay. I really appreciate that. This is a lot to consider. I wanted to pick up on the comedic, right? So like in thinking about the timeline of the visual representations, popular tropes, and also thinking about how, just in growing up, for me growing up in the Bay Area, there were like sporadic sites. And so this is like thinking about the 90s, right? There were these sporadic places where I saw parts of myself being reflected back. What was the function, or what would you say was the function of presenting Afro-Asian, and it's always in masculine terms. It was like the brotherhood films, right? The bros, right? Like the Black and Chinese, generally bros, right? Like that trope, that genre. Like what was the function of that? But then also in thinking about if we were to think about the blaxploitation films and the martial art, the kung fu films, and place them in a lineage or think about this in a genealogy, then this is one of my favorite rap groups or artists, the Wu-Tang Clan. Think about the Wu-Tang Clan and 36 Chambers, right? Like what they're referencing, what is it, like years later, right? Like, what am I trying to say? So something about like what was the function of comedy, that shift? Or is comedy one of the lenses through which this country will always see the Afro-Asian possibilities? And then, I don't know what I'm trying to ask about. I just wanted to bring up the Wu-Tang Clan and like blaxploitation films. Oh, my dad, who's Black, got a black belt and did martial arts he studied and trained in martial arts under a Black shifu in Oakland, California, right? So like there are intimate, tangible, material ways in which it wasn't funny, and like I saw it happening. But like on TV and in popular culture, it was all hee hee ha ha, you know?
That's interesting. I have a lot of thoughts. I just thought about, I sometimes teach Cleopatra Jones, and it's set in Oakland. And Pam Grier, she has this great like moment where she's wearing martial arts clothes, and it's just this like mashup of like karate and kung fu or whatever, and it's just such a wonderful moment that actually with my students I have to point out is like an Afro-Asian moment, because it would just kind of go over their heads, because she's also hypersexualized, so they always want to talk about like, oh, the camera's really sexualizing her, but I'm like, how and through what, right? And then we're like, okay, she's getting sexualized through Asian aesthetics. Like, what is that, and what and how is that happening? And then to your point about comedy, I think the first time that I ever saw really myself on screen was Harold and Kumar Go to White Castle, which was, I think, one of the first time, like Cal Penn's character was like the first time I had seen a South Asian American teenage boy that reminded, well, not teen, I guess he's in college, a young adult that reminded me of my cousins, you know, and before that it was just like Apu, you know, and so it just kind of felt so familiar, and even though it was a buddy comedy and it was really masculinist, it's still a movie that I love, and there's a moment where Cal Penn's character, Kumar, gets arrested, and he goes to jail, and there's one Black man in the jail cell, and there's this kind of deep conversation that happens between Kumar and this gentleman about the prison industrial complex. And then Harold and Kumar Escape from Guantanamo Bay comes out right after. And so it's a really kind of, you know, it's like a rejoinder almost to that conversation that they would get, you know, locked up in Guantanamo Bay. It's like an extension of what's happening in that moment. And it's all comedy. It's all funny, but it was also these really real conversations about like what it is to be, you know, racialized men in the United States that I had never seen before, and I actually haven't seen anything like that since.
I think you and I have talked about this before, but it's really important that Harold and Kumar is a buddy film, but it's also a stoner film. So it speaks to the fact that second generation Asian Americans, we're ready to be healed.
Yeah.
You know, like we're ready for some deontologizing moves. And so that's really part of it for me. And I totally agree that for our generation, that really was that text. Quick point about the Wu-Tang Clan. I have this friend named Rick, and I regard him as the greatest Asian American rap artist of all time. He's one half of this group called Year of the Ox, and I talk about their lyrics in my other text, Other Lovings. And Rick has actually toured with members of the Wu-Tang Clan, and he speaks so reverently about what it means to, to share a stage with Master Killa. And so one thing I would say about Afro-Asian connections, maybe especially pronounced in our generation, would be that the ways in which Asian Americans have been devoted to African American cultural forms and cultural expressions is a very serious thing. That it's kind of the anti-comedic, right? And then when they try to go the comedic route, like Rick's good friend, Nora Lum, aka Aquafina, they run into trouble.
Yeah.
And yeah, so the sincerity by which some Asian Americans, you could take this all the way back to Yuri Kochiyama and Ron Takaki, right, in our discourses, but especially just in the pop cultural realm, the sincerity with which that devotion gets expressed is something to be taken seriously under the umbrella of Afro-Asian connections.
I have to follow. I have to just Aquafina. Think about Aquafina, but then also, and I have questions. So we're gonna get the structure will prevail. But Aquafina, I don't know. This is like a tangent, of course. Aquafina and the embodiment. It's a type of blackface, no? It's a type of It's a type of blackface, but then in a way that for me, Jin the MC was not. Is it situational? And if you don't know, you should Google or YouTube, look up on YouTube, Jin the MC. And he was on, was it 106 and Park? This Chinese boy from Brooklyn, from New York. I'm probably so from New York, and he was in these rap battles, and he kept winning. And the way that he would, the lyrics, what he would, the lyrics, the things that he would rap about, what was, and I loved it because it was him taking away what his black opponents, for the most part, would have used against him. So you want to talk about me being a Chinese kid, a restaurant, you want to talk about Chinese food, chopsticks, what do you, slant eyes, everything. I'm going to take that and I'm going to weaponize it, but I'm also not going to deploy black stereotypes in battling you. I'm going to destroy you with the things that you're using to destroy me, which is very different. And I don't know, it's a different kind of read, and I suspect that it's situational, right? Sorry, I'm looking at you do you have a response?
Well, I would say what Jin and Aquafina have in common is that there wasn't a ready-made marketplace for them. So part of what they were facing individually so many years apart was that people didn't know what it meant to critique them as individuals within a black saturated cultural context. And Aquafina, I feel like sometimes the deluge of criticism that came her way around, basically since her character in Crazy Rich Asians, that was the kind of high-pitched moment of those think pieces. Sometimes to me, that critique verged on the idea that Asian Americans have to sound a certain way, and that Asian Americans need to be intonating or, I don't know, reflecting a certain kind of American diction and I don't know, sonority that I feel like that was lost in the mix of discussing her.
And I'll piggyback up on that because I've assigned the farewell to my students. Spelman students are not Awkwafina fans. Okay, let's just put that out there. Not Awkwafina fans. And, and I think I pose a similar question to them. I'm like, what does Asian American sound like? Right? Like, if we talk like this, then we're white. If we talk another way, we're black. And I'm like, what are you expecting? Do you want an accent? Because that's really racist too, right? And where you grow up in your region, not that Awkwafina grew up around black people, which is part of the problem, but where you grow up here is gonna dictate a lot of your language and your enunciation. And so there's this great moment in the farewell, if you haven't seen it, where Awkwafina's character just plays the piano like maddeningly. And my students always read that as some type of enunciation of Asian American articulation, right? Like it sounds like dissonant, it sounds beautiful at the same time, but it's this kind of accentless communication. And in this moment, she's grieving the possibility of her grandmother passing away. And what that means for her, the kind of link that she has outside of the US is broken. And so it's kind of like a gorgeous moment where her grief is just articulated through music. And I think that goes back to what you're saying. We don't what is to sound Asian American? I don't know.
I'm always like, because, so I have a 15-year-old daughter and she goes to school, so, right, like, and this is like where I think about the Bay Area too, where so much of Bay Area culture, what is defined as Bay Area culture, is actually an appropriation of a Black working class Bay Area culture, right? And specific to like San Francisco, Richmond, Oakland, like there are specific places, East Palo Alto, where this culture is being pulled from Vallejo, right? And it's packaged as if you're a person of color and you're from the Bay, then you have access to this. Except there was never a permission extended. There was never permission that was asked of Black folks to participate. It's just kind of like this, this is the Yay area, right? So like there's that where I'm thinking about like, what does it sound like? And I'm always, because my daughter's like, some of these, they're not, my peers are not white, they're also not Black. And they're using the N-word, right? Like they're saying certain things that beget or call, like call into question, well, what does it mean? Like, what does it mean to sound like if you are a person of color from the Bay, you're not Black, you're not white, you're in this space. And I'm almost like, well, what do people sound like when they talk to their grandparents? Because like, there's a way that you talk, right? Like there's a way that you talk where there's a, I don't know, like a casual way, but then like there's also the intimate ways, right, outside, public, but the private ways that you talk. But all right, I don't want to get too far off. Fijiana is like a Indo-Fijian rapper who just came out. Sorry, I'm like, we're on the pole, we're reporting live right now. I love that. She sounds like herself. She also represents the Bay Area. Like she is at the lake. For real, like, I mean, there's a music video, and there are, there's a range of folks who are all on her line, like, where you at? And she's like, I'm in the house. They're like, come out. And I feel like there's a way to do it, and some people, maybe not Awkwafina, but like some people are able to do it when it's of them and they are of it. And like, you don't have to question, there's no need to prove, so. And
I don't know what the criteria is, right? Like my partner is like, Aziz Ansari is white and Hassan Minhaj is Black. And my partner's Black, right? And he's like, I don't know how to articulate to you what the criteria is, but Aziz and Hassan like definitely emit a different racial energy, even though they're both brown dudes of the same generation. Like they just emit a different racial energy. And I don't know what you're saying about MC Jin and you know what I mean? Like what is it that makes it, I don't know, these are the fun conversations that I get into with my students too about appropriation.
Sure,
yeah.
But also thinking about the racial positioning of Asian Americans, and we're gonna get back, I'm sorry, we're gonna sync back up, but just thinking also about for Asian Americans who are neither black or white, but always beholden to black and whiteness, and having to kind of respond to and make certain choices, right? Like this kind of speaks to that ongoing question.
And I think that's why the idea of this, again, relatively autonomous Asian American cultural field that's alongside or adjacent to this, the Afro-Asian content that we're trying to describe and navigate. That's why that's so important, because all of a sudden in the younger generation, and I hope folks here can speak to this, is that there is no longer, to my mind, a necessity of using that weird kind of self-derogatory nomenclature of third culture anymore, because we have this kind of legible Asian American cultural field. Speaking of which, in 2021, when we started working on this text, I made it out. It was my first travels, after the vaccine, and I made it out to 88 Risings Music Festival in the Rose Bowl in Glendale, and that's the only time I've seen Sweetie perform. And so I was just so moved by, she was the Saturday night headliner, and I was so moved by being around so many Asian American youth, and I felt like an elder, like walking around. And then all of a sudden, I'm so emboldened by this, and then when Sweetie plays her hit song, I hear and see all these Asian American kids just rapping along the N-word. So I gotta get out of here. And so, yeah.
There's something to be said about, and for me, like, I don't personally identify, like, I don't use the term Blasian. It is, it's a pertinent term, but it also feels very, it's popular. It's popular in a way that I don't feel like I can kind of apply it, right? So, like, in thinking about Blasian, and then she, and here we go with like there's her, and then there's her. There's Sweetie, and then there's her. There might be, and then there's like a range of, and so like this is like a post '80s type of not even like a refocusing of the lens on the Afro-Asian body or being as feminine, as looking at it through and the sexualization of Black Asian women. I don't know where I'm trying to get at, but like the video vixens and Kumar Lee, right? So like there are popular figures. A.
Marie was always a musical icon in our generation, right? And she never shied away from her Korean background. But if you think about what kind of media opportunities A. Marie had back in the early 2000s and the aughts to express her Asian American, Korean American side, in contrast to Gabriella Wilson, her talking about what Filipino culture means to her, it's totally different. That's what I mean by this renaissance, that there's, even for the mixed race folks, there's a capacity to hear them articulate their identities as mixed race, as Blasian even sometimes, but also as Asian American. And I think that's an interesting switch in what we've lived through and again, the era that we're describing.
Sure. All right, back on track. How might alternative feminist and queer Afro-Asian archives and gazes offer strategies for survival or imagining otherwise? It's just like a...
Can you repeat the question? Sorry, we just found out that we have 10 minutes left, and I'm like, we're just getting started.
Oh, right now?
Yeah.
Oh my goodness, wait, 10 minutes before Q&A or 10 minutes just in general? Oh my gosh, we should Q&A it. We don't, all right, let's turn it now. Let's turn now to the audience to let you all have the ground to speak and ask questions, please. And I can the mic first.
Hi, my name is Misa. Thank you so much for putting this event on and the work that you guys have been doing. My question is, you mentioned insurgents. I didn't read your book yet. I will read it, but I'm curious, like, if you could elaborate more on that. And I think also on a personal note, I'm Black, Native, and Japanese. And I grew up in the Bay. My father actually was in Vietnam. And then growing up, and even now, I see people that are similar in identity to me with queer or multiracial, sorry, this is really sad, but I see a lot of young people dying, usually at their own hand, and like I look around and there's like police brutality towards Black people, and then Asian hate, and then all the other, like the queer trans kids that are my age, like, so I'm curious what this insurgence is, maybe on an individual note.
Well,
gotta
I
collect
guess
my thoughts.
eruption would be another kind of synonym, IRR, eruption. Like the idea that because the notion of Black Asian antagonism and irreducible conflict has become so naturalized that it's become commonsensical, any pushback in the field of cultural and political representation against that idea becomes a source of sustenance and maybe even psychic and existential resource. I'll say, I know I'm coming from South Carolina, where 3% of the state population identifies as Asian American. We don't claim Aziz Ansari, even though he's from South Carolina. He's probably, what's that?
You said that.
But what I would say is, I've had a lot of Asian American students come through my classrooms in the long time that I've been there now and say that, I'm so grateful that you're teaching some of these popular cultural materials, and I can say that if it weren't for Wong Fu Productions or Fung Brothers or any of these other kind of YouTube outlets that were the predecessor to this Renaissance era, they wouldn't have had any form of articulation for what it means to be Asian American growing up where they did. And so that to me is like gives me a sense of what kind of resource that pop culture can feel like and can induce.
Thank you.
Yeah, I'll piggyback on that with Meg the Stallion. My students love Meg, and one of my students wrote this great essay called "My Pussy Depressed," and she did this great reading of, Meg, I don't know if you've seen the video, but it's great. But like Meg comes like out of a snake, and she's like shedding her skin and stuff. But then the rest of the essay starts thinking about like how Meg's engagement with Asian culture is like a form of survival for her, right? Like to jump from my pussy depressed to like dressing up like Sailor Moon, right? Like there is a kind of ping pong there of like what do I engage with Asian popular culture that makes my pussy a little less depressed, right? No, but really, I mean, you're talking about your students being seen, and I think what's really interesting about my students is it's almost like May gave them the permission to like look outside necessarily of a siloed Black culture, right, for modes of survivability. And that I think is really beautiful. And you can call it insurgency, you can call it eruption, you can call it solidarity, but pop culture does play, I think, in a lot of ways recently, a really vital role, a vital political role, right? So yeah.
All right, another question.
Hello, my name is Brandon. I grew up in San Jose, Evergreen specifically, and so what I'm hearing you guys, and I just became very familiar with your guys' work. What I'm hearing you guys say has literally been my life for the past like 15 years. I'm like, wow, people have lived this like outside of me. But I'm a music minor on campus. I'm a jazz bassist, upright and electric. And so much of jazz historically has had a lot of back and forth, appreciation versus all those kind of discussions. I think of Wayne Shorter. He's my favorite composer, saxophonist. He has many songs, Japanese iconography. His daughter's name is Miyako. But then also there's a lot of the other way around. Japanese, what would you say, repurposing or appreciation of jazz, both in Japan, but I mean, there are all kind of subgenres. There's a lot of like Brazilian samba and bossa nova fusion, which is like a three-way kind of thing. What do you have to say about that? Just talking on the subject of what does Asianness sound like, sonority, those kind of things. What do you have to say about those things?
That's so cool. Oh, I wish we could talk for another hour.
Y'all know that there was a wave of Japanese migration to Brazil, and so like there's Japanese Brazilians, and I don't think that that's like the entirety. of what you're talking about.
Somebody sent me recently, there was a very famous Japanese composer of 8-bit music for the early wave of video game soundtracks, and he had, his name dropped out of my head, but he had sampled a Malcolm X speech. Are you familiar with this? Okay, yeah.
It escapes me too. I wouldn't be able to tell you, but I know exactly what you're talking
Yeah, so there have always been these kinds of, again, just radical eruptions of imagined and appropriative in a positive way, like in the sense that it actually draws from genuine political inspiration to mobilize, I would say, what I would call like the best of the Black intellectual tradition in, right, that kind of cultural form. And so I think that's really interesting that that's there. And then of course there's the whole history of Japanese imprints of Black jazz musicians, so the whole recording industry that exists there. So that's always been, you know, an ongoing, I guess, a global Afro-Asian connection.
Elliot Powell has a book called AfroAsian Sounds that's great. You should check that out. And then there's a movie, and it's escaping me, but Winston Marsalis invited classical Pakistani musicians to New York to cover like jazz standards like Take Five. This was like soon after 9/11, and his whole thing was like, okay, we want to recast brown folks for not being terrorists, right, but being musicians and make this beautiful music. And the soundtrack is remarkable. Like hearing Take Five with sitars is like, it's beautiful. I wish I could remember the name of this film. I'm sure if you Google it, you can find it, but I really recommend it. And I think, like you're saying, I think there's always been this connection, and it seems to come up at these like political touch points, like 9/11, Vietnam War, World War II, right? I think John Coltrane went to Japan and went to them. Yeah, you know, so I think that kind of alignment between aesthetics and the political kind of bridges, right, both the streets and popular culture or music in general, yeah.
Are we at time? I'm totally, okay,
Oh,
fine.
okay,
Beautiful. Other questions, comments? Yes, let me run to you.
Hey everyone, my name is Lindsay. I have a quick question. I love that y'all were talking about Saweetie versus A-Marie in the early 2000s. I'm of the age where I grew up with A-Marie. And I love the commentary about Asian American Renaissance. I've seen that younger artists like Saweetie, Joyce Rice, Laren Wong, they're all Blasian, or what you might call Black and Asian. The fact that there's more Asian American vocabulary around identity, does having more vocabulary make it easier to make more inclusive spaces? Because like as an example, a couple years ago, Joyce Rice, who's Japanese American and Black from San Diego, she was a headliner of like a Api Heritage Month festival in like SoCal, but maybe in A-Marie's day, we have less vocabulary. It's not that she wouldn't be proud of it, but there would be less spaces for her to be represented as an Asian American. So does the increase of vocabulary make it easier in general for us to have these better conversations, to be more inclusive to who gets to identify as Asian American in like a public space?
Yes. No, I love Joyce's work, and I think you're absolutely right. And her capacity to speak so eloquently about her cultural formation has always moved me. So I think she's a major figure, and I think that is a signal difference from A-Marie. I would also say that maybe this is another way to map the, not that I need to gas up Bay Area folks anymore, but the idea that the Bay Area has a special relationship, privileged relationship to the cultural field that you're describing, Lindsay, is that when one of my favorite rappers growing up was Gift of Gab, who was one half of Black Alicious, and he passed away during the pandemic. And one of my other favorite rappers is the great Asian American OG Lyricsborn. And to hear Lyricsborn talk about his friend who had passed away, it was so moving. And it was recently on a podcast where I heard this. And I was like, well, these guys didn't have the cultural vocabulary to call that Afro-Asian connections, but in the Bay Area, it was just common sense that of course there's an Asian American DJ and a rapper and, you know, in the mix, and that they consider themselves part of the same cadre, same generation, and same crew. And so to me, that's also a kind of undertold, under-narrated aspect of the cultural field we're talking about.
Yes, question.
Thanks for having this, by the way. It's not so much a question as a perhaps stepping into more conversation. But if you circle back to the slide that had Black Mirror and your the characters instead, yeah. I watched that same episode. I had a completely different takeaway from it. So your takeaway was interesting to me. My takeaway was we see the characters, one with blonde hair and one with kind of quasi white, phenotypical, not as Asian. So I see a lot of that in anime as well. And I'm wondering if you found some, what do I want to say, synchronicity between how art, anime, depictions like this step into whiteness, or step a character of color into whiteness, the same as when we look at what is given value in terms of Black folk being stepped into, a different colorist type of depiction that sometimes pulls us further away from our Blackness. Okay.
Thank you. Oh, I don't have an answer yet. That's a really great question. I don't have an answer yet. But I like that, and I know I didn't grow up watching a ton of anime, but I know that has been a really robust critique, especially from my students, right? Like, yeah, like what is the alignment of Asianness with whiteness in cultural productions made by Asians, right? Like what is that? And how does that like affect our imaginary of the way in which Asian ping pongs between Black and white or aligns itself with whiteness aesthetically? I don't have any answers, but it's a really provocative question. Do you have anything? No? No? It's
inspired a little bit by, I was reading Asian Americans in an Anti-Black World. And talking about racial triangulation. Yes, exactly. And how that makes strange bedfellows, the whole conversation that you're talking about.
Yeah.
Well, I can speak to that.
Yeah, I was gonna say, you can talk about it.
Allies in certain ways.
Yeah.
I think Professor Kim in that text and in that discourse sold out Asian Americans. I think, and she did that at the altar of wanting acceptance from an academic regime known as Afro-pessimism. So I think it's totally unfair to say and to evaluate Asian Americans as a whole having more complicity and participation in an anti-Black world than resistance to it. And I think our history has told us that you can, of course there's moments of like the aforementioned, right, the Rodney King uprisings and a slate of other moments that invite this debate, but you can always argue that Asian Americans have been more or less aligned with people of color consciousness in an anti-Black world. And then one of the contentions that we make in the introduction, right at the excerpt where I left off, is the idea that even if you take the precept of Afro-pessimism to be true, that the totality of the universe is an anti-Black world, it means that all forms of racist violence that you can experience and witness in that world can be thought of as a species of anti-Black violence. So you can still attend to the specificity and the lethality of anti-Asian violence and harm within that analytic. And so if you read Claire Jean Kim's text, or if you hear her lecture about it, you'll never hear her talk about the actual victims of anti-Asian violence during the pandemic. You'll never hear her even mention their names. So to me, I feel like that text and this debate that we're that Asian American Studies is going through at this moment has really missed the mark to talk about the plausibility, but also just the already existing notion of this kind of connection and collaboration.
All right, one more question. Oh, we're at last question, because I have to go to class.
Hi, I'll make it quick. Hi, my name is Nina. I'm a master's student in education here, current staff member with San José State, also Asian American Studies alumni. Anyways, thank you so much for your work as a martial artist and scholar in Asian American Studies. What you all said really resonated with me, and as someone who is working in the political and community space, it's something that I also see every day. You mentioned something that really resonated with me, which was that the Afro-Asian Alliance is a tense alliance. It's also an alliance, from what I heard, it's also an alliance that it's also filled with hope of what's to come. Seeing the patterns through film, through aesthetics, and also in our political movements, what do you hope for as we continue in the next generation, as we are in this current renaissance? And as kind of just a sharing reflection is, as someone who's in the political space right now, this encounter, this tense alliance that happens between the Asian and Black community is so, how do I say this? It's what really fuels our movements here now in this current generation. And speaking with other folks from the Bay, from all across the region, we're also, as the next generation, also talking about what it means to have intersectional advocacy and really showing up for elected officials who don't look like us but are from the BIPOC community. Anyways, long story short, what do you hope for in these patterns? Yeah.
I love that question. I mean, turn the cameras off. No, but really, I mean, I think we are at a moment of the potential for something that looks like revolution, and that's what I hope for. I think that 2020 was a harbinger of what I think should come, right? Which was, despite all the tension that there might have been between Black Lives Matter and Stop Asian Hate, there was a lot of connection there. And I think, this question about vocabulary, I think we're at a moment where there's a lot of consciousness about our differing oppressions and then where they might intersect. And we have a big bad wolf that I think we can all, align ourselves together, right, in varying ways through our different genealogies in order to fight. Yeah.
When I was in graduate school, living in Oakland, Yuri Kochiyama was still out and about. And she passed away the year I graduated. And so this idea of embodied Afro-Asian radicalism, Asian American radicalism, pro-Blackness, was a very tangible thing in my lived experience. And I'm hopeful that we can pass that on to the younger generations through our teaching and through our speaking and example and so on, and through cultural examination.
And I love that question too, because and this is the last thing I'll say, when we were writing this, we had such great conversations virtually. Seulghee asked me, he said, do you think we're the last generation of Asians to think Afro-Asian together like that? Because we're old heads now, and I think that, in the couple of Asian studies courses I took in undergrad, we didn't think about Asianness without Blackness. There was just there is no racial grammar without Blackness, so we didn't think about it. And hearing your question makes me think that no, we're not, and that's really great, We're not the last generation to think this way, and that's really exciting.
All right, we are over time, and I just wanted to thank you both again for being here, sharing the stage, sharing your work, your brilliant thoughts, ideas, and thank you all for coming out and being a part of this.
Thanks. Thank you so much for coming.